3 shadowy archetypes exist within human psychology, yet countless individuals remain utterly oblivious regarding which variant dominates their behavioral patterns. Such unawareness carries devastating consequences, explaining precisely why these people become exploited, abandoned, and ultimately erased from memory. However, those exceptional few capable of confronting their reflection honestly and recognizing the obscurity for its authentic nature emerge victorious. Authority gravitates toward individuals who abandon pretenses of virtue and instead cultivate mastery over the sinister forces genuinely propelling their actions forward. To explore how these internal forces silently influence decision-making and social dynamics, subscribe to Dark Psychology Decoded and uncover the frameworks that remain hidden from public discourse. When someone lacks comprehension concerning which archetype governs their impulses, sentiments, and aspirations, destiny has already rendered its verdict upon their existence. The most heartbreaking reality reveals how numerous individuals believe themselves formidable, when truthfully they've become emotionally dependent upon external validation and admiration from others surrounding them constantly. This represents the affliction characteristic of the initial archetype, the individual consumed by self-obsession and grandiosity. Such a person harbors no genuine self-affection whatsoever. Instead, they desperately require affection projected toward them by external sources continuously. They crave visibility, recognition, and perpetual applause from audiences willing to provide such sustenance. Upon entering any social environment, their cognitive machinery immediately begins computing not influence, not possibilities for advancement, but rather attention metrics exclusively. Which observers are focused upon them? Which individuals are averting their gaze? Who delivered compliments? Who demonstrated indifference? Within this frantic performance aimed at securing approval, they transform into servants bound by perception management. Yet from their distorted perspective, this behavior appears merely as confidence, magnetic appeal, and predetermined magnificence. They'll successfully persuade others that self-assurance radiates from their core authentically. The underlying truth, however, exposes their absolute terror regarding one specific outcome, becoming invisible to those around them, constantly evaluating their performance. The validation-addicted individual constructs their entire existence around securing admiration, yet perpetually experiences insufficiency regardless of praise quantities received. Underneath the theatrical presentation festers something corrupted, delicate ego structures requiring constant reinforcement. A solitary criticism triggers emotional spirals. A single dismissal initiates revenge fantasies. This personality type lacks authentic strength. They're experiencing starvation, and the more nourishment they extract from compliments, the greater their dependency becomes for survival purposes. You'll identify them immediately within every gathering. Excessively vocal, meticulously curated appearances, unnaturally polished presentations. Their smiles stretch broadly, yet their eyes ceaselessly scan surroundings for disrespect indicators. Offer them praise and watch them illuminate brilliantly. Demonstrate indifference and observe them diminish visibly. Challenge their narrative directly and witness complete deterioration. You've just exposed the facade slipping momentarily. These individuals lack genuine protective mechanisms. They possess only elaborate illusions. When those illusions fracture unexpectedly, they collapse toward two opposing extremes: explosive fury or profound despondency. Neither reaction demonstrates control. Neither response exhibits rationality. They've built empires upon reflective surfaces. Once their image no longer provides flattering feedback, they'll incinerate entire environments attempting to restore previous glorification. This explains why numerous individuals experience failure privately, not because capabilities were absent, but because their fragile self-concepts couldn't withstand unfiltered reality confrontations. One setback and they vanish completely. One injury and they retreat into imaginary worlds. They never embodied warrior mentalities. Instead, they remained children imprisoned within mature physiques, desperately seeking applause rather than pursuing genuine achievement. However, don't underestimate this archetype's potential for ascending hierarchies. They frequently rise because they've mastered wearing precisely calibrated personas. They adapt toward whatever qualities you admire most. They metamorphose into whatever image elicits your praise. Throughout political arenas, entertainment industries, and leadership positions, these individuals often climb faster than everyone else competing for positions. Why does this occur? Because necessity drives them relentlessly. While others deliberate carefully, The attention seeker seduces effortlessly. While competitors hesitate momentarily, this type poses strategically. They become mirrors reflecting collective desires, and crowds hungry for worship eagerly bestow crowns upon their heads without questioning authenticity. Yet here emerges the brutal paradox. Whatever elevates them simultaneously guarantees their eventual destruction. The instant admiration diminishes or disappears entirely, they self-destruct catastrophically. Consider the celebrated figures who disintegrated once spotlights shifted elsewhere, the authorities who couldn't tolerate criticism gracefully, the artists who disappeared completely once praise stopped flowing consistently. Failure didn't shatter them fundamentally. Their addiction toward being perceived as flawless accomplished that devastation. This transforms into dangerous territory, not exclusively for them personally, but for everyone existing within their influence radius. When the approval-dependent individual begins losing admiration streams, they don't exit gracefully or quietly. They manipulate circumstances, deploy guilt tactics, and fabricate narratives. They revise historical accounts. They demonize anyone who stops providing validation nourishment. Within relationships, they become domineering. Throughout business contexts, they turn vindictive. They cannot permit you to disengage because your attention represents their life support. Therefore, they'll shame you, enchant you, or obliterate you completely. Anything to maintain center stage positioning. When hero worship becomes impossible, they'll perform victim roles or worse, embody antagonist characters. Not through strategic planning, but through sheer desperation. This doesn't constitute genuine authority. This represents dependency masquerading as dominance. Once you recognize these patterns, you'll detect them everywhere constantly. The most boisterous individuals occupying spaces, the most polished presentations, those perpetually requiring special treatment and distinction. They're not experiencing freedom whatsoever. They're suffocating from applause withdrawal. Here's the final devastating truth. Most individuals governed by this archetype never achieve awareness until opportunities for change have evaporated. They believe they're pursuing excellence when reality shows they're merely chasing compliments endlessly. They consider themselves leaders when actually they're addicts dependent upon praise from external sources, while constructing false identities for public admiration. Their authentic selves decay progressively, unnoticed, unloved, and ultimately forgotten because they invested entire lifetimes attempting to embody someone else's ideal standards. Not once did they pause sufficiently to question their core identity when observers are absent. This inquiry haunts them perpetually. If they ever decelerate enough to confront it directly, the realization shatters them completely. The validation seeker doesn't desire authentic power. They want to appear powerful externally. That illusion eventually becomes their prison. Here's where genuine danger manifests. Certain approval-addicted individuals learn weaponizing their charisma systematically. They evolve deliberately. They study attention mechanics like warfare strategies. They seduce not merely for affection, but for establishing control over others. When this transformation occurs, the fragile ego no longer operates clumsily. They become calculated, strategic, charming manipulators who utilize vulnerability as protective armor. This evolution produces something considerably darker than the original form. They've progressed beyond desperate hunger for recognition. Now they've mastered controlling attention flows. No longer children begging for validation. They've become performers who comprehend audiences better than people understand themselves. They're refined, selective, weaponized, yet fundamentally the wound persists underneath. They don't seduce for genuine connection. They seduce because it provides leverage over others. Compliments cease being sustenance. They transform into currency. They exchange these for loyalty, obedience, worship. In this new incarnation, they become dangerous not just to themselves, but to everyone who mistakes their mask for genuine depth. Once you believe their illusion completely, they possess you entirely. When they possess you, they feed continuously, not always publicly displayed, not always obviously demonstrated. Behind every gentle smile and soft-spoken voice, they're extracting something valuable from you. Admiration, sympathy, envy, submission, all without wielding traditional weapons. Their genuine weapon is you yourself. They perform victimhood masterfully. They'll confess limitations, but exclusively ones making them appear courageous. They'll share suffering, but only through narratives centering themselves as tragic heroes. They'll admit failures, but only varieties making them seem stronger for surviving ordeals. This is how the evolved manipulator traps targets. By offering sufficient truth to seem authentic, sufficient vulnerability to appear safe, sufficient charisma to seem magnetic, you lower defenses. You trust, you admire, and gradually your reality perception begins distorting. You feel inadequate surrounding them but can't articulate why. You start questioning yourself increasingly. You become dependent upon their approval and terrified of their silence. That's precisely their desired positioning for you: uncertain, impressed, submissive. Because if you ever awaken to their authentic nature, the enchantment dissolves. Most never achieve this awareness. They remain trapped, orbiting their ego, spinning endlessly around a star radiating exclusively for itself. They confuse confidence with superiority. They confuse storytelling with honesty. They confuse emotional expression with emotional depth. They pay silently, wondering why they perpetually feel unseen, unheard, unworthy beside someone claiming to care for them. Because the validation-obsessed individual doesn't construct connections. They construct mirrors. You possess value only when reflecting something they desire seeing. The moment you present a reflection displeasing them, your independence, your anger, your strength, they punish you. Sometimes through distance, sometimes through cruelty, sometimes through sudden unexplained withdrawal. Each time they frame it as your fault. The evolved narcissist masters blame distribution. This makes confrontation nearly impossible. You can't argue effectively. They've rehearsed every counter-argument. You can't accuse them. They'll redirect towards you. You can't shame them because they'll utilize your accusation as evidence proving you're problematic. If you attempt leaving, they'll resurrect everything you once loved again, just long enough for recapture. They don't want you. They want your admiration. They don't love you. They love how you made them feel about themselves. When they no longer need you, they'll discard you gently, poetically, sometimes even with tears, but discard you nonetheless, because they're not here building with you. They're here building themselves. You're just another component in their self-image construction, yet you'll still miss them. That's the authentic cruelty. Even seeing them clearly, even understanding the manipulation, even after walking away, something within you will ache. Because they're experts at imprinting themselves onto your consciousness. They'll be first saying something nobody else dared articulating. They'll be the only one noticing that detail you always concealed. They'll remember things everyone else forgets. They'll provide a taste of being completely seen before snatching it away. That becomes the drug. Once you've tasted it, everyone else feels dull. That's their calculation. Because even if you hate them, if you remember them, they still win. But the greatest tragedy, they don't even know who they are. For all the masks worn, for all the identities crafted, for all the people mirrored, the core is hollow. No stable self exists, just shifting images attempting to catch a glimpse of something real. They're simultaneously master and prisoner of the performance. Eventually, when crowds disappear, applause fades and nobody's watching, they're left with silence. It terrifies them because in that silence there is no reflection, just the haunting question, who am I if nobody's looking? And they have no answer. So they start performing again. Another audience, another stage, another mirror, always running from the stillness that would force them to see the truth. And now you must ask yourself, does this type live in you? Are your goals truly your own, or are they just bait for applause? Do you act for yourself, or for the version of yourself you hope others admire? Do you crave growth or the appearance of growth? Because if you lie to yourself here, you'll never escape the narcissist's cage. You'll spend your life performing, pleasing, posing, and dying inside. But if you answer honestly, something rare happens. You stop acting and you start becoming. But the path to that clarity is brutal. Because once you destroy the illusion, another darker one waits underneath it. Most people never make it past this phase. Their entire lives are lost in the performance. Addicted to admiration, enslaved by their own image, but a rare few evolve. They stop needing to be admired and start needing to win. These individuals are no longer chasing praise. They're chasing control. And in this cold evolution, the second archetype emerges, the strategic manipulator. They don't care if you love them. They don't care if you fear them. They only care that you obey them. While the first type wants attention, the strategic manipulator wants leverage. They study people like blueprints. They speak only when it moves the board. They trust no one because they know the game is not about being liked. It's about being untouchable. This personality type is built on one core belief. People are tools. They can be used, sharpened, broken, replaced. They don't hate them. They simply don't romanticize them. Emotions are liabilities. Loyalty is negotiable. Kindness is camouflage. Reality itself becomes an instrument to be concealed or revealed contingent upon which approach secures triumph. You'll discover this archetype operating behind curtains perpetually. They embody the counselor role, the tactician, the invisible force maneuvering kingdoms. They seldom initiate conversations. Instead, they pause, scrutinize, and evaluate your essence before you comprehend your undergoing examination. When they eventually vocalize thoughts, it never constitutes a spontaneous response. Rather, it represents a deliberate maneuver, premeditated, precise, engineered to redistribute authority rather than sentiments. This individual doesn't experience temperamental outbursts because nothing possesses sufficient worth to generate emotional reactions. They've already anticipated treachery, already incorporated potential failures into calculations, already forecasted your potential disloyalty. They engage in extended campaigns, discrete operations, competitions without spectators present. While competitors broadcast their objectives publicly, they announce absolutely nothing. They permit others to vocalize while meticulously recording every utterance. They allow competitors to boast while accumulating intelligence systematically. By the moment you recognize their threatening nature, they've already secured dominance over substantial territory. That constitutes the strategic manipulator's superiority. You perceive nothing until circumstances become irreversible. Because unlike the validation-dependent individual craving visibility, the tactical operator comprehends this fundamental principle. Conspicuousness equals susceptibility. The individual who remains undetected becomes the individual who perseveres through adversity. You'll experience it when occupying their proximity. An unusual frigidity emanates, yet not overtly hostile. They can demonstrate mirth, exchange pleasantries, even display charm. However, something essential is absent. They never expose their authentic core. Their compliments never betray genuine admiration. Their frustration never exposes fragility. Their narratives never unveil tactics. You depart the interaction believing connection occurred, but it didn't. They presented a fabricated version deliberately while extracting everything necessary to comprehend you thoroughly. That's their methodology. The calculated manipulator perpetually accumulates influence, not through physical dominance, not through magnetic personality, but through advantageous positioning. Once they've secured sufficient placement, they don't engage in combat. They ensnare. You discover yourself out-strategized, intellectually surpassed, entrapped, and you never detected the approaching danger. What distinguishes the strategic operator from amateur manipulators is restraint. They don't react impulsively. They don't employ aggression when subterfuge accomplishes objectives. They don't sever relationships unless destruction creates pathways. Every act of betrayal is meticulously timed. Every partnership remains provisional. Every statement carries concealed implications. This isn't disorder. It's exactitude. That's what renders them formidable. They're not vicious. They're methodical. If harming you advances their position, they'll execute it gracefully. If assisting you cultivates devotion, they'll do it convincingly. You'll never discern which aspect you're encountering because they're not occupying any particular side. They're operating above the entire competition, observing everyone else struggle while they determine which maneuver concludes the contest. Yet even this archetype isn't invulnerable to hazards. The strategic manipulator may dominate others, but they risk one catastrophic vulnerability, believing they perpetually constitute the most intelligent presence anywhere. Hubris concealed within tactics remains hubris nonetheless. Once they begin underestimating opponents, once they believe their schemes are infallible, once they trust in their intellectual supremacy excessively, they stumble. Because even flawless strategies once exposed become targets. The supreme authority is always the authority you conceal. This is the strategic manipulator's paradox. To achieve victory, they must never reveal their approach. But if they engage too extensively, too detachedly, too elevated above others, they forget what the competition was originally about. Within that disconnection, their dominion deteriorates from inside. The question now isn't whether you recognize someone embodying this, but whether you're transforming into them. Have you started perceiving people as mechanisms instead of existences? Do you observe more than you communicate? Do you feel disconnected, composed, clinical, even during turbulence? More significantly, do you derive satisfaction from it? Because if you're evolving from a validation seeker into a strategic manipulator, you may experience increased strength, enhanced intelligence, even invincibility. But exercise caution. This archetype extracts tremendous costs. No genuine connection, no tranquility, no authentic partnerships, only advantages, only endurance. Once you've selected that trajectory, there's no returning to purity, only the subsequent level of obscurity. They don't trust you. They don't trust anyone. That's what maintains their sharpness. The tactical operator awakens already engaged in competition before checking communications, before uttering words. Every single day represents a battleground, not of physical violence, but of strategic positioning. They don't need to vocalize threats to inspire fear. They just need to understand what you desire. Because the individual who comprehends your desires controls your choices, and the strategic manipulator has perfected this. They examine people surrounding them like researchers. They discover their vulnerabilities, their cravings, their shame, not to remedy them, but to exploit them. Their relationships are architectural plans. Their generosity constitutes entrapment. Their quietness is methodology. When the moment arrives to attack, they don't elevate their voice. They extract one element and the entire fabrication crumbles. This individual understands what most individuals never will. Dominance surpasses affection. Leverage endures longer than threats. If the admiration seeker needs to be worshipped, and the aggressive type needs to be feared, the strategic manipulator simply needs to be obeyed without opposition. That's what renders them hazardous. You'll believe it was your concept to yield. You'll believe you trust them because you selected to. But every statement you heard, every compliment you absorbed, every account they shared was manufactured, not for your endorsement, for your submission. They don't need to persuade you. They just need to construct the environment where resistance feels draining and agreement feels organic. When you realize you've been guided, you'll be too entangled in the network to break free. But this isn't regarding trivial manipulation. The strategic manipulator doesn't squander time on sentimental contests. Their vision encompasses greater scope than attention or retribution. They want dominion, governance over the complete board, not just individual pieces. That's why they often ascend. In commerce, in governance, in conflict, the frigid tactician is always positioned behind the seat of power, if not occupying it. They calculate not just individuals but entire frameworks. They identify the most fragile connection in the construction and apply force. They don't require a throne to govern. They just need the individual on the throne to be indebted to them. That's the brilliance. While competitors pursue authority directly, they acquire it indirectly through obligations, confidential information, and quietness. They don't struggle to dominate the environment. They make the one dominating the environment request their guidance for subsequent actions. But here's the affliction of this archetype. Nobody genuinely knows them. That seclusion, while potent, becomes its own confinement. Once everyone surrounding you is a pawn, nobody is ever truly intimate. You begin questioning devotion even when it's authentic. You anticipate treachery even when it's not approaching. You become dependent upon outsmarting everyone and paranoid that someone might accomplish it to you. So you never unwind. You never trust. You never cease monitoring. Even in success, there's strain. Even in harmony, there's scheming, because the strategic manipulator has confused expertise with purpose. They've mastered the competition but forfeited the reason for engaging in it. This is where the sinister transformation initiates. Some strategic manipulators grow weary of pretending, of executing performances, of waiting. Within this exhaustion, they relinquish tactics altogether. What emerges in its location is not deliberation, but pandemonium. Frigidity transforms into brutality. Exactitude transforms into annihilation. The manipulator becomes the obliterator, because eventually even the strategic operator becomes bored of controlling strings. They want to experience something authentic, but genuine connection is impossible for them now. So they pursue sensation alternatively. Hazard, suffering, authority for authority's sake. This is how the tactician becomes the third archetype, the most dreaded of all. Before that plunge, you must question yourself. Are you here already? Are you executing the competition so effectively that you've ceased asking why you initiated? Are you isolating yourself for protection or because you no longer believe in anything but dominance? Have your relationships become exchanges? Has your identity become tactics? Because if you're already existing in the strategic manipulator's consciousness, then you comprehend how it concludes. Frigid triumph, silent chambers, no trust, no serenity, just a consciousness that never stops rotating, and a universe that never feels secure enough to permit it to rest. From here, the subsequent phase isn't elevated. It's deeper into something more primitive, more merciless, and considerably less human. They don't require your endorsement. They don't require your allegiance. They don't even require your focus. The third archetype has progressed beyond competitions entirely. The emotionally detached predator doesn't strategize like the tactician or hunger for worship like the egotist. They operate. Pure impulse, pure determination, pure supremacy, no remorse, no embarrassment, no uncertainty. While competitors remain calculating hazards, They're already mobilized, and by the time they process what's transpiring, it's already finished. The emotionally void individual is not concerned with standing. They aren't burdened by dread, regret, or self-questioning. That's what renders them lethal. They embody total detachment. Not metaphysical, but clinical, an individual who experiences nothing except the exhilaration of authority when others recoil. You won't identify them initially. They don't always resemble disorder. In fact, they're often tranquil, excessively tranquil. While competitors express fury or alarm, they observe, eyes frozen, locked, incomprehensible. They don't elaborate excessively. They don't rationalize. They simply navigate through obstacles, individuals, repercussions as if they're non-existent. And to them, they aren't. Because moral conscience is a burden, sentiment is a restraint. The past is meaningless. Only the subsequent action holds significance. That's why they can fabricate without flinching, inflict harm without remorse, obliterate without pausing. It's not individual. It's not even malevolent. It's instinct. The hunter doesn't despise the quarry. They just don't care if it suffers. You'll locate them wherever there's turbulence, not concealing from it, but advancing directly through it. While the egotist immobilizes without praise and the tactician awaits the optimal instant, the predator generates the instant. They flourish in flames, in unpredictability, in warfare. The more unrestrained the universe becomes, the more commanding they feel. They don't experience alarm when regulations shatter. They shatter them initially. This provides them an advantage that horrifies weaker individuals. They're willing to proceed further, transgress boundaries, disregard regulations, silence morality, because to them restrictions aren't ethical, they're discretionary. Most people's self-control is just another instrument for them to manipulate. But this isn't foolishness. The emotionally detached predator is not a savage. They're deliberate, concentrated, and often exceptionally intelligent. They know what you anticipate them to experience, and they replicate it perfectly. They can articulate appropriate statements, display appropriate expressions, even weep if required. But it's all theater internally. Nothing resonates, nothing adheres. Because to experience emotion is to be susceptible. They removed that component of themselves long previously. Maybe through suffering, maybe through selection. It doesn't matter. What matters is that now they are unregulated by conscience. This allows them to accomplish what competitors can't. Advance into the tempest unwavering and manipulate it to their determination. Not because they're courageous, but because they don't care if they perish attempting it. This is why the emotionally void predator often becomes the sovereign when empires crumble. When ancient regulations no longer safeguard the vulnerable. When organizations disintegrate. When terror proliferates like conflagration, they ascend. Because everyone else is immobilized by repercussions, but they have none. While competitors negotiate, they seize. While competitors pause, they attack. Even those who perceive them accurately often still follow. Not from affection, but from reverence. Because profoundly, people admire what they fear, and they fear what they cannot anticipate. That is the predator's talent. You never know if they'll spare you or smile as they terminate you. But there's a consequence. The emotionally detached predator secures dominance, yet sacrifices their essential human nature completely. They might emerge victorious from conflicts, yet depart the battlefield utterly solitary. They might construct vast dominions, yet occupy the sovereign seat surrounded by absolute quietness, because nobody places confidence in them. Nobody harbors affection toward them. Nobody remains permanently. They embody a tempest traversing territories, abandoning casualties throughout their journey, and continuing forward entirely unscathed by consequences. Their identity may reverberate throughout historical records, yet nobody will mourn their departure when existence concludes. The devastating reality is, they possess zero concern regarding this outcome. That's what renders them profoundly heartbreaking. They don't desire rescue or redemption. They don't subscribe to salvation concepts. They exclusively believe in might, in supremacy, in the unfiltered, pitiless determination that compels the universe towards submission. Once you internalize that philosophy, reversing becomes nearly insurmountable. Nevertheless, numerous individuals attempt wearing that facade. They replicate the bearing, the frigidity, the intense observation. However, mimicking the emotionally void predator differs fundamentally from authentically embodying one. Because when genuine turbulence arrives, most individuals recoil instinctively, most individuals plead desperately, most individuals shatter completely. But the authentic predator advances forward entirely unaffected. Not because courage defines them, but because they possess nothing remaining to forfeit. The instant you cease dreading repercussions, you transform into someone capable of absolutely anything imaginable. The emotionally detached individual doesn't recoil because terror demands imagination capacity. They no longer envision suffering, deprivation, or aftermath scenarios. They've progressed beyond storytelling frameworks, beyond remorse, beyond the sentimental connections that immobilize most individuals. This complete absence of uncertainty provides them a horrifying superiority, velocity. While competitors analyze situations endlessly, the predator mobilizes immediately. While competitors agonize about potential results, they generate them forcefully. Not cautiously, not systematically, but with unrefined explosive intensity that destabilizes everything occupying their trajectory. This isn't irresponsibility or carelessness. It's liberation. A liberation most individuals cannot fathom because they remain bound to embarrassment, recollections, and communal acceptance requirements. But the predator severed those bindings previously. Within that severance, they became unreachable. Yet don't confuse their authority with achievement. The emotionally void individual isn't a constructor. They're not a planner. They don't value lasting influence. They don't bargain, cultivate, or safeguard anything. They subjugate, then proceed elsewhere. They flourish amid disruption, not formation. In seizure, not administration. That's why numerous ones exhaust themselves, not from being conquered, but from tedium. Once no additional adversaries exist to demolish, no additional boundaries to transgress, no additional pandemonium to sustain themselves upon, the excitement evaporates. Without that excitement, absolutely nothing remains. Because unlike the tactical operator who deliberates for extended time frames, or the admiration seeker who hungers for importance, the predator doesn't examine beyond the immediate present. Their existence is a sequence of current moments, each one more intense, more violent, more rebellious than the preceding one. Nevertheless, some ascend toward terrifying elevations. Corporate executives, military commanders, ideological leaders, criminal overlords, they govern not through motivation, but through compulsion. Not always corporeal, frequently mental. Their observation alone can immobilize an entire space. Their quietness can devastate an individual. Their attendance modifies environmental dynamics because everyone perceives it. This is someone who doesn't respect regulations. Not yours, not civilizations, not divine authorities. Within a universe constructed on collective fantasies, morality, compassion, accountability, the individual who steps outside those fantasies possesses inconceivable authority. The authority to operate without limitations, to determine without regret, to annihilate without hesitation. That is the predator's domain. Frigid, unconditional, faithless. But here is where the misconception of jealousy commences. Numerous feeble individuals admire this archetype. They believe strength signifies inspiring dread. That to be liberated they must experience nothing. That to triumph they must become merciless. But they don't comprehend the expense. The predator doesn't select this trajectory. They are this trajectory. Their emptiness isn't an advantage. It's a circumstance. And it arrives with a subtle agony most cannot perceive. Separation, the incapacity to experience affection, the incapacity to experience elation, the incapacity to belong anywhere. They may govern the environment, but they'll never experience comfort within it. They may demolish every opponent, but they'll never experience tranquility because no tranquility exists without emotional bonds, and they've already eliminated everything within themselves that could form attachments. Even more devastating, when the predator experiences failure, they collapse inward, not with sentiment, but with nothingness. They don't deteriorate like the egotist. They don't reconfigure like the tactician. They simply cease operating because they never acquired how to endure suffering or how to exercise patience or how to reconstruct. They exclusively know how to dominate. When domination proves unsuccessful, nothing remains. No fellowship, no objective, no self-concept. Just a frozen silence more profound than mortality, because it continues existing. This is the ultimate expense of the third archetype. When they succeed, they stand isolated. When they falter, they disappear. Regardless of outcome, the narrative concludes in seclusion. And now you must question yourself one final time. Which archetype governs you? Which facade have you been displaying so extensively you forgot it was a facade? Have you been pursuing commendation like the egotist, believing celebration would make you authentic? Have you been maneuvering components like the tactician, convinced that governance means security? Or have you become the predator, disconnected, methodical, unreachable, but hollow? Most individuals are governed by one, influenced by another, and pretending they're none. But the exclusive pathway to genuine authority is merciless honesty. Because when you finally acknowledge which sinister impulse directs you, you don't become vulnerable, you become conscious. And consciousness is the initiation of expertise. Not to repress the darkness, but to channel it. Not to pretend you're virtuous, but to become ruler over your own shadow. That is the scarcest authority. The individual who perceives the egotist within himself and restrains it. The individual who perceives the tactician and refines it. The individual who perceives the predator and restrains it. They're not innocent. They're not gentle. They're not harmless. But they're awakened. And in a universe of unconscious individuals, they're the most hazardous archetype of all.